On today's episode of There is a Floodlight That Never Goes Out, we speak to Sheffield Wednesday journalist Dom Howson about all things Sheffield Wednesday and what it's like covering the Owls. Hello guys and welcome back to another episode of the There is a Floodlight That Never Goes Out podcast. As ever, I'm joined by Tom and Will, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Dom Howson. Hello Dom, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you guys.
Good. Should we start off by just telling the listeners sort of what's your role and what your job entails?
Yeah, so I am the Sheffield Wednesday writer for Yorkshire Live. I used to be that for the Star for over 6 years, and then I moved to Yorkshire Live in March 2020. So it's just been over a year. But I mean, previously I've covered lots of other sports, not just football, from snooker, squash, rugby league, you pretty much name it. So sports always been my passion and what I wanted to go into. So had a bit of a period where I was doing some news reporting, but I always wanted really to sort of become a sports writer. So very lucky and privileged to be doing what I'm doing right now.
Great stuff. So obviously you cover Sheffield Wednesday on a daily basis. So obviously it's the best place to start. I think there's one simple question, although perhaps how simple it is left to be decided. Have Wednesday left themselves too much to do to avoid relegation?
I fear that they might have done. I really hope I'm wrong. I look at the table and the gap between them and safety. I think they need a minimum of 4 wins, but I think they may actually need 5. And it's a shame, really, that I think if Darren Moore had been in charge longer, then I would have definitely fancied them to get out of trouble and stay up. But I feel as if the damage has already been done. And as great as the win and the performance was against Cardiff, we haven't seen that anywhere near enough this season. And it's been extraordinary, hasn't it, for so many reasons, from all the problems that they've had off the pitch, all the managerial changes. So it really has been unprecedented for Wednesday. And I really hope I'm wrong, but at the moment, I feel as if that they're going to just fall short.
Definitely. I mean, you touched upon Darren Moore and his impact there, and we've certainly seen a shift in the sort of style of play. And I would argue perhaps the attitude of some of the players when on the pitch in terms of positivity. Just how much have you sort of felt that from the players and from the sort of everyone involved at the club in your time covering since Darren's come in?
100%. I do think that there is a sort of newfound sort of sense of optimism and hope, and that positivity has definitely come back. I think since Darren Moore's come in, I do look at them, and you can see that the players, they are really enjoying the style of play, and it's going to take time for Darren Moore to implement his philosophy, and it's clear that he wants to play out from the back. And I think the issue right now is that I would argue they don't really have the personnel and the players yet to play on a consistent basis the way that Darren Moore wants to go about things. But I think that again, with time and smart recruitment in the summer, regardless of what division Wednesday are in, I think that's going to be the key really for Wednesday being successful moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a renewed sense of optimism at Hillsborough, but do you think this season's just a culmination of a few years of poor recruitment, probably managerial appointments that haven't lined up with one another, and that Wednesday going down's probably something that was to be expected?
I don't think it was to be expected. Clearly, you kick off a season on -12, you're up against it, and you know that you're going to be in a relegation battle from the off. And then clearly Wednesday get the big boost a third of the way through the season, that the points deduction's been halved. But then straight after that, they then had the first managerial change where Gary Monk was sacked and Tony Pugh came in. And I think if Wednesday ultimately do fall short and go down, I think we'll look back on that 10-game reign of Tony Pugh as actually, I think that's cost them more than,
Yeah.
funnily enough, when they lost 7 on the bounce earlier on this year when Neil Thompson was in charge, because it was everything really about that 10 matches. It was anti-football. It was 5-4-1. It wasn't pleasing on the eye in the slightest. And you speak to the players, and I think that they have made it again quite clear that I think that they didn't really get on board with it either, that it was too much focus on, oh yeah, let's stop the opposition from playing rather than focusing on Wednesday's strengths. And so, yeah, they scored, 7 goals in those 10 matches, and they won once, only picked up 7 points. And so, yeah, the chairman, Dejphon Chansiri, he made that decision halfway through the campaign to get rid of Tony Pulis, and it wasn't ultimately right. But coming back to the what you said on the question, I think that it's years of mismanagement, poor decisions, poor recruitment. It's a culmination really of a lot of different factors. That's why Wednesday find themselves in the position that they're in.
Yeah, sort of. Well, regardless of what season, what division we're at the end of the season, there's the obvious fact is that Wednesday, a lot of players are out of contract at the end of this season. Sort of, who do you envisage staying, leaving, and sort of who are you unsure about at the minute?
Right now, it's hard to definitively, say with 7 matches to go, when the uncertainty is still hanging over Wednesday over what division they're going to be in next season. It's not me copping out with the question or ducking it and sitting on the fence. It's just right now, I'd love to be talking to you guys and saying that I'm really confident, as an example, that Azazi Urhoghide is going to still be a Sheffield Wednesday player next season. I think we'd all be in agreement that whatever league Wednesday in, Championship or League One, that Urhoghide has got a bright future and is someone that is worth persevering with. And we don't want to see another Liam Shaw with Urhoghide. So, his fingers crossed that, Wednesday, they've offered him a contract and talks have been ongoing for some time. But understandably, if you're a player right now, you're not going to be rushing into signing a new contract when you could be dropping down the league. So you're going to bide your time, and you're going to wait as long as possible for it to become clearer whether Wednesday are going to be playing in the Championship or League One. They've got to do what's best for them, and football is a short career, isn't it? And so it's a tough one, really, isn't it? I think it was interesting on Sky's coverage, I thought, on Monday with Gary Monk in the studio, and I do agree with him that I think moving forward and in the long run, this is where there's got to be a bigger picture at Wednesday, and where this is the 3rd year in a row where you're talking about over double-figure players are going to be out of contract in the summer. So there's going to be a big turnover. Whatever happens, we know that. That's nailed on to happen. But, Wednesday, I think, have to eventually reach a point where not so many senior players are getting into the final 6 months of their contract. You're wanting more stability. And if you're going to lay those solid foundations to go on and do really well, then I don't think Wednesday can keep getting themselves in that position of where senior players are running out of their contracts and getting into the final 6 months before negotiations are really sort of kicking in.
Yeah, obviously there are some key players out of contract, the likes of Bannon, Hutchinson, obviously with that clause in terms of game time, rewarding him with a new contract. There's been a lot of cynics perhaps in the fan base talking about Bannon. Oh, he must have a relegation clause. Is that something that is that just their own opinion, or is there some truth behind that?
I don't know if for definite what the case is. What I would say is that I would be a little surprised if Wednesday's hierarchy, when Barry Bannon has renewed his contract, have maybe allowed the relegation clause to be inserted in there. So I don't think necessarily he would have a clause in there. But the fact of the matter is that we've seen in the last 3 matches, with the way that Bannon's performed, that
Yeah.
if worst case scenario Wednesday are relegated, there's going to be a lot of Championship clubs looking at Barry Bannon, and I'm sure there'd be a lot of interest. And Bannon is 31, and we're seeing that he still has aspirations to get back into the Scotland squad and play in the Premier League. So, from his perspective, it's going to be an interesting one. He's moved to Sheffield in the last few months, and he's got a young family, and so he's settled here. But of course, if Wednesday are relegated, then that potentially changes everything, not just with him, but some of the other sorts of prized assets that Wednesday have.
Yeah.
Dom, if I could just ask you, obviously Sheffield Wednesday bringing in Darren Moore, do you think that's almost a shift in the approach of the entire club, and almost it's not the sort of typical manager we've seen Wednesday go for in the past? He's more used to getting young players with a lot of potential in. Do you think that's the approach Wednesday will now take on?
I do, yeah. I think there has been a shift, and I think actually, well, that's been one of the big problems that they've had, in that this club hasn't had an identity for the last couple of years, and they've changed the managers, and it's easy to criticise the recruitment from last summer, and I personally don't think that some of the signings have come in and added a lot to the group. Without naming names, I think it's quite clear from the stats. You look at some of the players that were signed last summer; they haven't contributed anywhere near enough. But they signed players for Gary Monk's system and way of playing, which was 3-5-2. And then when you change your manager midway through the season to Tony Pulis, who his preferred way of playing is with a back four, and you don't have a left back, a recognised left back on your books. There's Matt Penny there, but I think still the jury's out on whether he's going to cut it in the Championship.
Yeah.
In his career, I still think he's got a lot to prove. I think he's got plenty of ability, but he hasn't delivered on a consistent basis. So that's the problem there, that there's been a lack of balance at times for Wednesday this season, and not a lot of joined up thinking with the recruitment. But I do agree with you that I think that if Darren Moore is there in the summer and he is allowed to put his stamp on the club, that you're going to see young and hungry, dynamic players going off his track record, and when he's managed at Doncaster Rovers and when he's been at West Brom, it was exactly the same. So I think that you would see, some players that have got points to prove. Yeah, I think that's probably the way that he will want to go in the summer.
Yeah.
Dom, you talked there about players with points to prove, and a man who's just been training with Wednesday, Ravel Morrison. I think he perfectly fits that sort of category. Obviously, with the recent revelations about transfer embargo, the conditions to sign Ravel, regardless of of whether Moore liked him or not, seem that they weren't right. But Moore has said that the door isn't shut on Ravel Morrison, and do you think the club might make a return for him in the summer?
Possibly. I think 3 transfers they're going to certainly be looking at. And, we saw some arrive last summer, didn't we? In Elias Kachunga, Kiride Adoyin hasn't figured at all yet, partly due to injury. But, I'm sure there's some other players that I've forgotten there. But, yeah, the use of the loan market and free transfers, I think, is going to be very important for Wednesday. And I know that there's been work that's been going on behind the scenes in the last month or so, that Darren Moore's been in the building and that he's had with the recruitment team, and he's got one eye on the future. And that, Wednesday, they have to get the majority of their transfer business right this summer. They have to, if they're going to push on and learn from the errors that they've made in the last few years. And we're starting to see anyway, and clearly the pandemic has hit not just Wednesday, but so many clubs up and down the country, that I'm not expecting anyone to really splash the cash and spend millions in the summer. You know, I don't. I think those days, for the time being, it's not going to happen. So, yeah, Wednesday I think will be very frugal with how they go about the business and operate in the transfer market in the summer, and I think that's the right way. I think they have to look to try and bring in some players that are keen to learn, and I think that the big selling point is Darren Moore, in that his attractive sort of brand of football that he wants to play. I think that there will be players in the top two divisions who will want to come and join that and be part of it.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, you talked about sort of the need to be frugal, obviously with an economic climate. Now, obviously nothing came of these links, and they were probably strenuous at best. But the club was linked. I think it was around January, February time, with looking at a director of football, perhaps in David Webb. This is sort of like your own personal opinion. Do you think a director of football is the approach that Wednesday perhaps need to go down to get a bit more of organisation in terms of recruitment strategy?
It's been a huge talking point, hasn't it, for a number of years. It's a little bit pointless in having the discussion, in the sense that I don't see it, while Dejphon Chansiri is chairman, him bringing in a director of football. So it's you sort of, whether you believe in it or not, you're kind of wasting your breath, really, in whatever views and feelings you have on the subject. I feel as if maybe not even a director of football. Do you know what I mean? For me personally, when you're talking about the structure at the club, it's not actually a sporting director or director of football that they're crying out for. They're crying out for a chief executive. They must be one of the few clubs in the country that hasn't had a chief executive now for a couple of years. And I just think that would be a really sensible appointment moving forward, and would take, frankly, a lot of the burden and the stress off the chairman as well, if there was somebody that was running the club while he's not in the country. And we know that Chansiri hasn't been back to England since the pandemic hit. He's in his homeland in Thailand, and so yes, with modern technology, of course, you can still speak to people comfortably enough on a daily basis on Zoom or whatever it might be. But I think that in terms of speed of decision making, and then having that footballing expertise and nous in the building, that's where, for me, since we've had Paul Aldridge briefly was there after Chansiri bought the club, and he left in 2016, and then Joe Palmer, Chief Operating Officer, for just over a year, and then Catherine May. So there's been a few people, but they haven't had anyone now since Catherine May left, I think over a year ago, might even be 2 years ago now. So it's a huge void, I think, really, at the club. And to me, that is more important than actually Wednesday bringing in a director of football. And I'd say that based too on the experience that they've got in the recruitment department. In David Downs and Dean Hughes, who I do think have been good additions. And I know that the recruitment gets slaughtered for last summer, but you do have to remember that Wednesday were severely impacted and affected by the fact that they started a -12. So players weren't rushing to and queuing up to join Sheffield Wednesday last summer. And I think fans and people, they're deluded if they think they were, that, how many players would want to immediately sign up for a relegation battle. So it's not as if they had the pick of the players. And we've seen from this season that actually Callum Patterson and Josh Windass, I think those two as examples have been good value for money for what Wednesday paid.
Definitely, I agree definitely with the sentiment that in recent transfer windows, Wednesday have spent their money a lot better. I mean, Dom Howson, how much was he? Was he about 250,000, ranging to 500,000? A great purchase, and we've got a lot of bang for our buck, if you like. But just going back onto the sort of CEO mould, and Catherine May, it seemed to be going quite well with her. Though, I think she'd introduced the sort of the family stuff in the car park at Hillsborough, and there was a lot of positivity around what she was doing. And then all of a sudden, sort of under a cloud of smoke, she left. Do you sort of know / can say why she left, or is that still kind of unknown?
It just didn't work out, and it's one of them that sometimes you bring somebody in and you hope that they're going to have sort of a big input in all matters around the club. But yeah, no, I think that's really all the sort of is to it with Catherine Mayer. That I know that from speaking to a fair bit, and also when she did some of the fans forums as well. But, I think she spoke very well and really bright, intelligent woman, and I think that she is a very impressive figure without a doubt. And she's gone back to Belgium and she's got a very senior position over there too. So that's all really there is to it. I don't think there's anything else sort of sensational about it. It was just one of those appointments that she was around for a year or so, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work out.
So you don't think it was perhaps foreboding the impending points deduction or legal troubles the club had?
No, I don't think it was. No, I don't think it was anything really to do with that. No, not at all. I think it was personal sort of circumstances for Catherine, and that really is all there is to it. It certainly wasn't anything to do with the threat of the points deduction and then all the off the field troubles that Wednesday have had, as we all know, and that are well documented from the last 12 months or so.
So whilst we're sort of talking about the arena of owners, Derby County announced yesterday that they'd agreed a deal to be taken over by a consortium headed by Eric Alonso. Now, he's had sort of an involvement with Wednesday in the past. Could you tell us sort of what you know about Eric Alonso as a figure?
Well, I think he was working in sort of an advisory capacity, wasn't he, at Wednesday for a few months, and in all honesty, from the people that I've spoken to at the club and Eric himself, I don't really think in the time that he was at Wednesday that, again, for whatever reason, I don't actually think he brought that much to the table. I think his remit was to sort of focus on the commercial side, and then really what ensued over the sort of December, January period was, if anything, there was a little bit of a power struggle between Eric and Amadou Paxao, really, in that they both were trying to put managers forward to replace Tony Pulis. Eric was very vocal and pushed quite hard for Paul Cook, and Amadou Paxao had other people on his list. I think that. It was. I think it was causing sort of disruption really behind the scenes, and again, not what Wednesday wanted. We know that he was publicly he was messaging fans constantly all the time, and I do think it was causing a bit of division really in and amongst the fan base. And yes, it later sort of emerged that Eric Alonso and his Indonesian backers, that they tabled a bid to buy Sheffield Wednesday between 25 to 30 million, and that was rejected by Dejphon Chansiri. And then not long after that, Eric Alonso released that statement, didn't he, on social media? I think after the Coventry match, saying that he'd left, and then a few days later, Chansiri sort of clarifies why he left, and then as we've seen that in the last sort of month or so, he's been in talks with Derby, and it looks like he's going to take over at Derby.
Do you think personal? Sorry, Ed. No, your personal view, do you think that he's a safe pair of hands for a football club?
Really hard to say, honestly, not sitting on the fence. It's going to be fascinating to see how Derby fare and how they go on. And from what I was told, yes, that Alonso and his Indonesian backers, they've got some serious financial clout. And so I think we're going to find out really over the coming months and years. And I think they'll sort of be quite happy that they've already got a big name, a big profile name manager in there in Wayne Rooney. And so they look at that and think that that's going to help them bring in players in the summer. But yeah, we'll see, won't we? If they're going to, seriously push the boat out. I don't think Derby are going to get relegated. I expect them to stay up. And then next year, I'm sure they'll be looking to kick on and challenge for promotion.
Dom, you mentioned earlier perhaps the most controversial figure amongst the Wednesday fan base in Amadou Pakshao. Could you perhaps clarify what his role is in relationship with Chansiri?
He's been an advisor to Chansiri for a number of years, and he's someone that on the recruitment side for players and managers, he has a big input. It's pretty much there. It's as simple as that, really. But the final say with every decision at Sheffield Wednesday is always made by Dejphon Chansiri. And so, he is someone, Amadou Pakshao, that I think divides opinion. And maybe that's, I think, largely down to the fact that he's never just sort of done an interview publicly as well, talking about his role at Sheffield Wednesday. And perhaps that might have, I think, eased some of Wednesday fans' concerns, over his role. I think actually it's a tad harsh. I think some of the criticism that Pakshao comes in for, and I remember when I did a long interview with, I think, Chansiri last year, and actually, everyone sort of associates Amadou Pakshao with the bad business that Sheffield Wednesday have done post 2017. After missing out in the playoff semi-finals against Huddersfield. But actually, Amadou was the one who helped bring Dominic Iorfa to the club, Barry Bannon, a number of other players too. So I think that in some quarters he does maybe get, I think, a bit of unfair stick personally, and it's not, shouldn't be just down to Amadou. I don't think it's right to just blame him, I think, for some of the shortcomings that Sheffield Wednesday have had in the transfer market.
Yeah.
Dom, if I just ask you about, you mentioned obviously doing interviews, etc. with Chansiri, and obviously amongst the media there's so many different things about what he's like, etc. But obviously you having conversations with him, what is your kind of, what is he actually like?
He's unique. That is the best way to describe him. Yeah, he is. He's a one-off, and I think that he's actually big personality. And then when you're in his company, he's actually very generous with his time. We've seen that in the media over the years. Actually, that I've never known a football chairman who is prepared to do fans forums for 5-6 hours, steering groups as well. He's done media calls for 2.5 to 3 hours, and he won't shirk a question. He will always try to answer your question as openly and as honestly as he can. If anything, sometimes he's too honest with what he says. Thinking about what he said after he'd sacked Tony Pulis. And then around sort of New Year's Eve period of where, he spent 20-40 minutes there where he was, seriously criticising what went on with Tony Pulis when he was in charge. It's a difficult one, really, isn't it? That this is without a doubt the most sort of difficult time of his premiership, and there has been, I think, there's no getting away from it, and especially if Wednesday are relegated, that he's got to take a big percentage and responsibility for Wednesday going down. And that ultimately will lie at his door. It will, of course, it will, and that's the way football works. That as the figurehead of the football club and the owner, and Chansiri, I'm sure when he bought the club over 6 years ago, he didn't envisage that, after two near misses, that now that they'd be fighting for their lives and would be scrapping it out at the wrong end of the table. But I think that there are certain things that in the summer he could do to get the fans back on board more. One would be certainly appointing a chief executive. I do think that would, again, and somebody of repute, somebody who has got the contacts and I think the knowledge and that expertise and everything that I think the club are crying out for right now. I think that would certainly be one way of pacifying the fans. And I do think the club will have to think long and hard about season ticket strategy or certainly match day ticketing policy if they are relegated into League One. Because let's be right, if fans were allowed back into Hillsborough from tomorrow, it would not be it wouldn't be a happy place, would it? It wouldn't be a very positive, upbeat environment. That's for sure. There is still a bit of a disconnect. I think the appointment of Darren Moore in the long run is a shrewd one, and I think he could be somebody that would help unite the club. But I do think that that Chansiri and Wednesday hierarchy in general, I think they have got certainly a lot of thinking to do in the summer about the way forward and what they can do to get more of a sort of a united front, really. I can't think of a club in recent years where if there's been a disconnect or there's been apathy off the pitch, that always filters on the pitch, and that is never, good news. And I feel right now, this season, especially in all my years of covering Sheffield Wednesday, it has been quite toxic at times on social media with everything on and off the pitch that's gone on. And so, you just hope that I think lessons are learned from this season.
I think it's a very similar situation to what it was like at Sunderland when they ultimately got relegated to League One. And do you think if Wednesday do go down, they'll be successful in League One, or do you think it'll be a real struggle to get back up to the second tier?
What they've done in appointing Darren Moore is that they've actually got a manager who has managed teams in the Premier League, the Championship, and most recently League One. So he ticks a lot of those boxes and he knows what's required in League One. So I think that will be hugely beneficial to Wednesday. If they do go down, that I think his contacts and he knows teams in the league and what to expect. And Doncaster Rovers were challenging for promotion when he'd left to join Wednesday, and so he had a winning formula there, and they were doing well, and they were on an upward curve. And I think that, that's going to be definitely important for Wednesday. But I think there also has to be a sense of realism and perspective too. And you look at some of the clubs in that division, Sunderland, Portsmouth, Wigan, have not bounced back straight away. So anyone who thinks that Wednesday, even if they recruit well in the summer, are going to walk League One next year, I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening. It's a really tough league, and so it might not be that Wednesday bounce back at the first attempt. They can take heart, I think, from what Hull have done this season, and you look at where they are. I think they're on course to get promoted, so I suppose that's a sort of blueprint, really. And they had a dreadful second half of the season, and that's why they ended up getting relegated. But they've regrouped, they've bounced back, and that's what Wednesday will have to do in the summer, should the worst happen and they're relegated.
Just one final question on Wednesday, Dom. You talked about sort of pacifying the fan base in the summer, and I completely agree. And I truly believe that Chansiri's heart's in the right place. But perhaps one of the most recent criticisms came in January, where apart from 2 free signings in Andre Green and Sam Hutchinson, the club didn't make any more additions. Do you think the club planned to make more additions? It was just an unfortunate series of events that led to no one else coming in, or do you think that was a conscious decision?
Oh yeah, no, they tried for so many players, and I actually reeled off in one of the pieces I did in January after the window closed. I reeled off purely strikers. There were half a dozen players that Wednesday tried for, they wanted, they were interested in, they had talks with, and they didn't get the deals over the line. And that was down to not being a permanent manager in position, Wednesday being in the relegation zone. So it made it really challenging. And in an ideal world, Wednesday would have liked to have signed at least 4 players in January.
Yeah.
And you hope when we're looking back on the end of the, at the end of the season, that they're not going to be left to rue that. They didn't get a striker in. For me personally, striker, it was more important they brought a forward in than it was that they signed Andre Green and Sam Hutchinson. I actually would have sacrificed those two coming in on frees for Wednesday signing a striker on loan or on a permanent basis. That was what everybody could see they were screaming out for. But then, of course, the irony is that now that Darren Moore's come in, that Jordan Rhodes is inarguably the best player in his Sheffield Wednesday career. So you've got him. Josh Windass have formed a really good partnership, and Callum Patterson has also, I think, had a pretty decent season really in his first full year by getting 8 goals and a few assists, considering his position has constantly changed from midfield, up front, and then right wing back at Watford that we saw last week. So, yeah, I think that Wednesday, it was one of those where I know that they were privately disappointed, and they tried as much as they possibly could to get at least a striker in, and they were going for a left back as well, might I add, but they missed out on Harry Pickering, and then they tried for 1 or 2 other players. So it wasn't for lack of trying and effort that went on behind the scenes. It was the circumstance, I think, that cost them really of not having a manager in place. And if you're a player, are you going to go to a club where you're not sure that who the manager is going to be a week after you've joined or a month down the line? Or are you going to go to another club that have had, let's face it, more stability than what Sheffield Wednesday have had all season? So yeah, it was a very difficult window, not just for Wednesday, but across the board. If you actually look at it, there weren't masses of deals that were done in the Championship, full stop. So I do have some sympathy for Wednesday, that I think a lot of effort did go in behind the scenes on recruitment and trying to bring in that extra forward. But they also weighed it up and looked at it that Jack Marriott was coming back to full fitness, and Derby didn't activate his loan recall. So Marriott, Rhodes, Patterson, Windass, Kachunga, that's quite a lot of forwards. So in theory, Wednesday should have had enough firepower. Really, that's in some sense, I'm sure that they'd have seen that and thought that they maybe would have needed to have balanced the books and perhaps let somebody else go out as well. Because to try and justify having 6 forwards on your books, we're going back to Carlos Carvalho days, aren't we? Where they had 7 or 8, if you include George Hurst at one stage. So, yeah, to answer your question, they missed a trick in not signing a striker in January, and you hope it doesn't cost them. But we're going to find out, aren't we, in the next month?
We really are. So just sort of going on to something a bit more about your career, what would you say sort of your favourite moment covering Wednesday as a journalist?
Oh, without a doubt, the run to the playoff final in 2016 and the scenes after in the second leg against Brighton. That season in general, I always say it was special. It was a group. It was just it was a team that the way that they gelled and got stronger as the season went on, and they had quality all over. And some of the football that they played what we saw against Cardiff the other day, that team must have done in at least 10, 12 of the matches that season. It was the best football that Wednesday played, by all counts, since the Big Ron days. That's what everybody says. That Big Ron days were before my time, but everybody said that, it was so attractive and pleasing on the eye, and they could score goals for fun, because if it wasn't Forestieri who was you're doing the business, it was Joao. If it wasn't Joao, it was Hooper and Bannon, arguably at the peak of his powers in midfield. Kieran Lee, Glenn Leuven's, Tom Lees as a partnership, as good as anything in that league. Just defensively and going forward, they had just a little bit of everything that season, and it was so disappointing that they again came up short in the final. But you have to, I think, just give a whole lot of credit that their Premier League class, pedigree, the midfield three that day of Huddleston, Diarmi and Livermore, they were too good for Wednesday. And had it not been for Kieran Westwood, they would have won by a lot more than the one goal. And but that season, I'd have to say, and getting to the final and to be there actually for the occasion of 40,000 plus Wednesdayites there. Not bouncing throughout, the noise, the generators, completely outnumbered Hull's fans. Little did I know, 5 years later, this is how things would be panning out, and so it was a great season, though. I have to say, it was a privilege covering that year.
It was magical. I mean, you talked there about the football under Carlos and the sort of mirroring the days of Big Ron and sort of that. I don't want to say simple 4-4-2 pass and move, but it really was just so effective. When you obviously part of your job is sort of interviewing players and managers, are there any particular favourites that you look forward to or have looked forward to?
Oh, in Wednesday's squad, there's some really good talkers actually, from Tom Lees, Barry Bannon, Adam Reach. Those three, whether they win, lose or draw, they would always stop and speak to the press. They always give you, I think, some honest answers and some really insightful opinions on everything that's going on at the club, their own form, managers, whatever. They give you a lot of insight. But I have to say that the two Wednesday squad that you particularly look forward to speaking to the most when they are put up for the media are Kieran Westwood and Sam Hutchinson.
Yeah.
They are absolutely fantastic. They are box office. That's what they are. They will always give you a great soundbite and that brutal honesty. They're just, you can tell that they're just two big personalities. And they've both got great stories to tell. So I must admit that Hutchinson and Westwood would be my top two in favourite players to interview in Wednesday's squad and down the years in the time that I've covered the club.
Dom, obviously you cover Sheffield Wednesday as a journalist. Do you actually support Wednesday, or are you a supporter of a different club?
No, I don't actually support Wednesday. I was brought up supporting Huddersfield. So, as you can imagine, the 2017 playoff semi-finals, that was interesting, to put it mildly. But, I have to say I've grown such a huge affinity to the club and over the years, and you really root for them. You want them to do well. And Wednesday, it takes over my life a lot of the time, and not just through work, but this is why it's been hard actually the last few years. That really they've been getting pelters left, right, and centre from all angles, and all I would want is for it to go back to the 2015-16 season, as I'm sure Wednesdayites would feel the same, and. The decline and sort of the downward spiral that we've seen, it's actually been really hard at times, even covering it, and it does affect you. But I must admit, even the other day for Cardiff, when when Adam Reach filled in the third, even I let out a little bit of a sort of shriek in the press box at just like, how amazing that was. So no, Huddersfield aren't a team, but no, if I stopped covering Wednesday tomorrow for whatever reason, I would always be looking out for Wednesday's results and looking to come back to Hillsborough every opportunity I could get. Honestly, you just grow attached to them. Just there's so many good people at the club. And I'd love nothing more than for them to be doing well. And actually, what people a lot of the time they forget, it's in my interest for Sheffield Wednesday to do well. From a work point of view alone, I don't really want to be covering League One football with Sheffield Wednesday next season. I'd much rather be in the Premier League with them and going to Liverpool and Man United and Manchester City. But no, it's more than a job now, and Wednesday as a club, it's more than that now for me. I have to say that, they are. They'd be with me forever.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be our final question. We've got to ask you: do you think Sheffield Wednesday will get relegated? So no.
Yes. Pains me to say it, but yes.
Stuff. I'd be very happy with that as a Barnsley fan.
I was just going to say that we've got through this whole podcast on with two Barnsley fans, and they've made relatively few digs. I think barely any, which has been a privilege.
Hard, but we've managed to keep them in.
Yeah. But I think that sort of wraps it up for the podcast. Dom, it's been a pleasure having you on, and thank you for everything that you do, sort of covering the club, especially in these COVID times. It's imperative. As ever, thank you to Tom and Will for joining us. This will be going out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We've just been approved for. So if you do like it, leave us a good review. That'll be greatly appreciated. And thank you for listening.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.